Michael, and welcome to Lake Havasu City, Arizona, where we'll be bringing you highlights of one of the most arduous powerboat races in the world. The 20th running of the Lake Havasu Classic, with its 2.5-mile boomerang-shaped course, is a true test of driver skill and endurance. Joining me on the broadcast today is former world champion tunnel boat driver Lee Sutter. Lee, you've been out there on this course a few times. What makes this race so difficult?
Well, 4 hours makes it difficult. You have to run a 4-hour total endurance, and you run it 2 hours each day. And one rule states that you have to finish at the end of the 4th hour in order to place.
Lee, also a very interesting aspect is the conditions themselves. The waves may change, so it's going to be a tough decision for the drivers to set themselves up for the full weekend. The whole city, by the way, gets involved with this race, which has been going on since 1964. Race director Butch Wood and the Havasu Sports Federation go all out to make it a spectacular event in which thousands of people come year after year to enjoy this exciting boat racing. One of the most interesting things about this race is Lake Havasu City itself. It's a mecca for water sports. The city is most well known, though, as the site of the London Bridge, which was moved to Arizona and rebuilt in 1971. Lake Havasu City is located 150 miles south of Las Vegas in the Arizona desert, and the bridge and its surrounding shops bring tourists from all over the world. Lee, as we take a look at the pit area, we might mention that we'll be seeing 3 classes of boats running with a lot of competition between types of hulls and engines.
Well, this is a race where you really, what they say, run what you brung. You can bring all different kinds of equipment, and there's a class that it'll fit in. It varies from 200 to 400 horsepower engines, and there are limited production race boats to unlimited anything-go type hull designs.
Because of the length of the race, the boats are permitted to make pit stops and driver changes. There, Lee, you get a chance to see the boats early in the morning as their pit crews standing behind each engine, getting the drivers ready to go. One of the most famous and respected teams will be seen is that of Bill and Mike Seabold. The Seabolds were last year's winners, and we talked to Bill about how he sets his boat up for enduro racing.
Your strategy is to get out and set up pace that you can live with and try to keep the RPM on the engine, below 8,000 RPM. And, you have to carry, we're carrying 38 gallons of fuel. So actually what we'll do is Mike and I will drive in the same boat. One of us will start and run the first hour, and at the end of the first hour we'll come in, and it's just like a NASCAR, IndyCar pit stop. It's the least amount of time you spend in those pits helps you on the race course, because actually in enduro it's most ground covered in 4 hours.
Is there anything different you have to do to modify the boat to add the extra fuel, the center of gravity load shifting on you?
Well, we CG the boat's different. Yes, we move the center of gravity back because we're carrying such a heavy fuel load, 38 gallons of 100-octane avgas. And we do run a larger boat here, especially in Lake Havasu, because it's known for rough water. And there again, you don't want to go out and run a 250-pound boat, on a 3.5-mile race course with 600 pounds of fuel in it. So it'll pound itself apart. So we run a heavier, longer boat, basically. Speeds are lower than they are in a sprint race, and it's very good for the drivers that like to just settle in their boat, and it gives you a chance to really get familiar with your boat in 4 hours.
The maestro of tunnel boat racing, 45-year-old Bill Seabold, who will be teaming up with his son Mike, the 26-year-old, both from St. Louis, Missouri. The defending champions are going to try to do it again today. Lee, let's take a short break and get set for the Lake Havasu City Classic here in Lake Havasu City, Arizona, and we'll be back with the highlights of racing action right after this. Steve Michael and Lee Sutter back here with you in Lake Havasu City, Arizona, where we're bringing you the Lake Havasu Classic. Lee, tell us a little bit about this boomerang course that gave the drivers all sorts of trouble during their 2 days of racing.
Well, nobody likes to turn right, and when you look at the monitor, the pit area race control area has a right-hand turn around the shoreline. You run down the shoreline then into a bay in turn 1, and you make an extremely sharp turn there and run out to turn 2, which is about a 5/8 mile stretch to turn 2 in the middle of the lake, and then you run around turn 2 down to turn 3 into a bay again, and you commence around the pit area corner, which again is a right-hand turn, and it's very difficult to turn right.
Well, one of the most exciting classes of boats in powerboat racing are the tunnels. Let's take a look at the 24 boats that came from all over the country to take part in this race this weekend.
Well, this is a tough field, Steve. When you start looking down the down the numbers of the boats and the drivers that are lined up, if you notice that there's several drivers in most of the boats. And what that means is there's co-drivers involved, and they do have driver changes anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half into the race. When they stop, they pit, and they fuel. Of course, 190 is the Seabold father-son team, and they'll be extremely tough, and they're defending champions. Incidentally, we have in boat 281, we have a father-son team, the son being in the Hoffmans and the son being a defending national champion in one of the classes.
Also an interesting combination that'll be going today at 213, which is Rick Adams and Lee Davies, a Canadian, getting involved in the racing coming down from north of the border.
Well, in boat 819, if you notice the name May, that's Ted May. He was drawing Social Security checks when I started racing 20 years ago, and he's a heck of a driver, I want to tell you. The grandfather of the race course.
All in all, Lee, a pretty impressive display of drivers that'll be going here early morning. Some of the drivers will be going solo. Others will have 2 drivers per boat. The people going solo, I imagine, Lee, will want to be using at least 1 or 2 pillows for it's going to be a long, long racing day for them.
Well, I've tried to run this race solo, and I personally think it's better to get a co-driver. You really need a relief out there. The fatigue sets in really after about an hour and a half, and that last half an hour in the 2-hour segment is going to be very difficult for the driver.
Lee, we're getting set to go. The gun is off. And a great shot there as they go away from the beach very quickly. And Lee, let's talk about their aspect of where they're going to be going in this first buoy.
Well, the first turn that they'll make is halfway across the lake. They actually run through turn 2, and they make a turn and come back to turn 3 and then enter the race course. The actual starting buoy, the first turn buoy, will be removed after the start of the race, which they're entering into right now.
With rooster tails flying the water back as far as 50 and 60 feet, we see Charles Riley, the 38-year-old out of Riverside, California, in the lead. But keep an eye on the Seabold boat as he comes up alongside.
One thing difficult on this race course is to establish your line early in the race. It seems like a lot of drivers can establish their line, and when you start making the right-hand turns, you run off course, and then you get inside the buoy line, and all of a sudden you're making some awful difficult corners, and you lose time on the race course.
Well, you see him coming down the front stretch, and oh, so closely as they take a look at Bill Seabold as he comes past Spectator Point. When you get to that vantage point, and there you see him setting up for trim, it's got to be tough that first lap, finding the boat at full speed. You've got to play with it a little bit, don't you, to make sure you've got it just the way you want it.
Well, Steve, it all depends how you want to set the boat up. A lot of drivers set the boat up for a mid-fuel load. As an example, when Seabold was talking, he said that he's packing 38 gallons of gas. Well, that's about 300 pounds of gas and an extremely large tank to accommodate that gas, obviously, which means it weighs a lot. So they're packing 300 pounds of weight around, and what they have to do is they have to set the boat up in a happy medium. You don't want to set the boat up to be the most efficient with 300 pounds of gas, but on the other hand, you don't want to set the boat up where it runs fast light, because you're going to suffer for a lot of time as the gas load runs down. So the best thing to do is to set the boat up in between. So they'll be a little bit sluggish at this point. As you saw Seabold, when he came around the corner, he was bobbling around quite a bit. He's using a lot of trim to try to get the boat airborne, to try to get it sailing around the course.
A lot of the boats now, as they come around the first turn, as they work their way back for the second time, when you get in that vantage point, Lee, are you setting up and trying to find out if a boat goes by you? Should you worry about that, or should you sit back? Or are there chargers or not? That's what I'm trying to ask.
There's rabbits out there. A lot of drivers, what they'll do is there's no limitation on how large your tank can be or how small it can be. A lot of drivers, what they'll do is they'll set up as real light in a sprint condition. They'll go out and try to grab the early lead. I've tried it. It doesn't work. What you really have to do is, the best way to do it is carry a 1-hour fuel load, come in, pit at the end of an hour, be traditional, make a driver change, and go back out with a fresh driver in the boat. Seabold's doing this. He stated that these engines burn in the classification that Billy's running in, which is Mod Unlimited. He's running 142 cubic inch V6 Mercury. That runs about 30 gallons an hour. So he has 8 gallons of spare gas in there in case he does run long, in case something comes up where he needs some extra gas.
get a good chance to take a look at the pits, and now we've got some action. Some of the drivers were coming in. They were having problems early on, and there was one of the expectant leaders, Jim Johnson, his boat, the 42-year-old out of La Palma, California, in his Seabold Mercury. And what things can go wrong early on, Lee?
Well, what happened was they didn't have any time to test, so I would say that basically that they weren't allowed any time to do their homework. And if you can't test to get the right mixtures and get the right setup, anything can go wrong in the boat. And this really isn't devastating, Steve. I think what you should do is take your setback early, come in, fix your problems, and re-enter the race. Remember that it's a 4-hour marathon, and a lot can happen in 4 hours. As a matter of fact, some past winners have come in several times into the pits and gone back out running extremely strong after they fix their problems.
Well, it's beautiful scenery here at Lake Havasu. The fans during the weekend enjoyed everything that was on hand. They had a chance to see great racing action. We've got more coming your way right after this. Steve Michael along with former world champion tunnel boat driver Lee Sutter. We welcome you back to Lake Havasu City, Arizona, in the beautiful palm-drenched portion of southwest Arizona. It's halfway point through race number 1 of day number 1, and it's pit stop time. Lee, let's talk about the techniques of fueling.
Well, the environmentalists are highly involved in the fueling procedure, along with the Coast Guard. And what they do is they set the regulations for how you can refuel because they don't want any gasoline spilled in their lake. What they do is they fuel on a gravity system. They have about a 200-gallon tank and a 4-inch hose that comes down, as you can see the pit crew holding the hose, and they just actually fill the gas into the boat with the gravity method. This is where you don't want to make any mistakes. Sometimes the anxiety of a driver can cause precious seconds because you might overshoot your pit area. So you have to be real cautious in this area.
We also have to be cautious because there's quite a few people around that open gasoline hose, and not a graceful way for a driver to exit a boat, is it, Lee?
No, it's not. What they do is they get you out of the boat as fast as they can, and they get the fresh driver in. And what normally happens is they carry the driver to the boat. They stand him on the deck while the other driver gets out. And if they want to convey any information, if they don't have radios, this is the time that they convey the information about the race course or the situation with the boat itself.
Lee, just a second ago, you had a chance to see a boat that was painted predominantly green. In auto racing, that is a real superstition. It doesn't fare well. How about boat racing?
Well, it's kind of funny you should mention a green boat because I can remember a few years back when I had a new sponsor get involved with my race team, and he wanted to paint some green on the boat, 2 boats as a matter of fact. We went to the World's Championships with 2 boats entering 2 classes, and I was wiped out in both classes, and we destroyed both boats.
So does that mean you don't have a green car in your driveway anymore either?
I duck when I see green, actually, but some people might not be superstitious.
You know, one thing we haven't talked too much about, Lee, is the different divisions here. You can notice that some boats are going particularly faster than others. When you, as a driver, were coming up on a faster or a slower boat being faster, would you have to be more cautious? Did you have a certain way and a method that you would use to judge distance and speed?
Well, when you're running a segment of 2 hours during the day or a segment of 1 hour when your time is out there, and it's a 4-hour event and it's measured at the end of 4 hours, you really have to drive defensively, opposed to driving a sprint race where you have to take more chances. What I've done is I've watched out. If I know that I can get through a hole and get by a slower boat, I'll take the chance. But if I think there's any chance that I can't make it, I'll back off and go around him.
Lee, with the race coming close to an end here at midday, you can see the reflection of the sun coming off the water. Was that a real problem for you when you were racing?
Well, it can be a real problem, but what they have now is polarized lenses that they can put on the helmets, and that'll eliminate most of the reflection problems. But at Lake Havasu, there's brine in the water, and the brine causes a buildup on the face shield, and you really lose a lot of visibility because of this, and it can be a problem.
There you see the Bud Light boat of Bill and Mike Seabold out of St. Louis, Missouri, coming around for the final time. In day number 1 here, they picked up a 3-lap victory over Ken and Rick Hoffman, the father-son combination out of La Crescenta, California. There are the results in Division 1. Stewart finishing in 3rd. Division 3, Johnson, McKay, and Brown all coming up very well. Overall, you see Bill and Mike Seabold with 62 laps completed in 2 hours' time. And there you see the final top 10 finishers of day number 1. We'll be back with highlights of another class of racing, the Mod VP. For day number 2, the tunnel boat finals coming up right after this. It's early morning, day number 2 here at Lake Havasu, Arizona. As you see the beautiful, majestic mountains in the background of California, you see the boats in the water ready to go. They're silent right now, Lee. It's going to be a Le Mans start. This is a lot different than most starts that a lot of people are used to in racing. Tell us a little bit about the feelings that you have to go through when you're about ready to go.
Well, what a Le Mans start is basically the driver. It's called a semi-Le Mans start, which means the driver sits in the cockpit and they shoot a flare off, and anywhere between 1 minute and 0, they'll drop the white flag. And when they drop the white flag, the drivers take off, as they're doing right now, and they're off.
And they all head out for the starting buoy here in lap number 1. And the sun is still trying to come up. It's actually quite dark here as the day begins. But a great vantage point here, Lee. They're coming right at you.
Well, you can really get a good view of the boats. You can see where they're coming off the pit stop, and they're narrowing, like running into a funnel to go around the first corner. Of course, the first corner is out in the middle of the lake, and then they re-enter the course, as we've discussed before.
The Canadian driver from Vancouver, Lee Davies, has grabbed the lead. You know, some drivers have opted to switch. In other words, the person who started day number 1 is starting second in day number 2. Why is that?
I think it depends on who owns the boat and what the situation is. Davies is running very good at this point. He's running light, he's running loose, and he's real quick. You can see Seabold coming up on the outside.
Well, the youngster Mike Seabold, 26, out of St. Louis, Missouri, is nipping at the heels of the Canadian Lee Davis. He wants that lead. He started second in the race yesterday, and more attrition for the boats. You see 2 more drivers trying to paddle toward shore to get close enough to where their crew can come on out and help them. This is going to be disheartening so early on in the race.
Well, they have a rule that if you declare at the end of the first race, within 1 hour after the race, that you can change your engines. But, of course, a lot of times what you do is you wear your engine down and it's running well, and you start it back up the next morning, and lo and behold, you've run into problems that you didn't detect the night before.
Well, the race continues on as Mike Seabold had grabbed the lead as he heads off into turn number 3, making the turn back toward the pit area. Mike Seabold started the race today with his father Bill sitting out. It was just the opposite of what happened yesterday. And there you see some of the nice color that they have around here at Lake Havasu. Some of the crew members working. Unheralded heroes they are, as we see one of the boats coming in. Lee, have you ever been in a situation where you've had to be in the boat and they brought you in after an accident?
Unfortunately, I've been packed in several times, and these people are really unsung heroes because they can save people's lives.
Despite the numerous boats that turned over during the weekend, we're happy to report, Lee, that nobody was seriously injured. There's an interesting boat John Castelli drove during the weekend. They made him race that boat in the tunnel class because even though it looks like a modified boat, it had a large experimental engine, and it was asked to race in the champ boat class during the weekend. Some of the crew members turning the boats over. We had a lot of windy conditions and a lot of boats were getting tossed in the water here, Lee. They're trying to get the boat back, as we can see more drivers trying to paddle their way back toward the pits, hoping to get the crew members close to them. You know, if you see a boat like that, Lee, turned over, what does it take to get that engine back in running shape? Can they do it during that day, or do they have to really wait and put on a new engine?
Well, it can be done, but there's 2 or 3 steps that you have to take. First of all, if you can imagine, under race conditions, the motor turning approximately 9,000 plus RPMs, and it goes into the water and engulfs a big shot of water. What might happen is it might get hydraulic to pieces. You might bend the rods in the engine, break a piston or whatever. If that hasn't happened, then what you do, if you want to get back in the race, you're going to have condensation setting in, and it's going to cause rust.
How an expensive process is it?
It's time more than anything, when you have to have lots of friends and lots of wrenches if you want to get back into the race.
As the boats come by one more time, we are 1 hour into the race, and we're getting set to go. As they come by, we see Mike Seabold whistling by the leader, who has almost a 4-lap lead. And now they begin their fuel stops. Crew members crawling all over the boat, trying to get it into position to turn around and get the boats right back out as quickly as possible as they leave the pits. And we'll be back for the exciting conclusion of this race right after this timeout. Welcome back as we enter the final hour of the tunnel boat race here at beautiful Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Steve Michael along with Lee Sutter. And Lee, here's an interesting shot. You get a chance to look at the race from the other side of the lake.
And the camera doesn't eliminate the right-hand turn, unfortunately.
Beautiful shot of the mountains here at Lake Havasu. The boats lapping at about a 90-second pace. They seem to be averaging pretty close to about 110 to 115 miles an hour. There's one of the newer boats, a beautiful example going down, heading for pin number 2, as we get a chance to see the city of Lake Havasu in the background. But wait a minute, Lee, the boat here slowed down and it started to head back toward the traffic in this race. It looks dangerous, but what happened here?
It looks like he had an engine failure, and what they have, in the interest of safety again, is they have a rule that you cannot cut across the course. And I'm sure what happened was that when the engine failed, the driver wanted to head for the pit area. But what he has to do is he has to go around the entire race course and then drop into the pits when he gets down into the pit area.
One of the most important things that a car racer has is his rear mirrors. They don't use mirrors on these boats. Why is that?
Well, because of the attitude of the boat, the bow going up in the air and then coming down, it's very hard to get a mirror that will adjust to this, and there's a lot of vibration off of the glass cowlings. I've always wanted to run rear view mirrors, and some drivers have tried to do it, but there isn't a mirror that works that well yet. So they just simply swivel their head, look around, and make sure it's clear to make their move.
Well, being so confined in the cockpit, how much actual room do you have to swivel your head to see another driver behind you?
Well, there's plenty of room to swivel your head, but the problem has been, and it's always a problem, is whether or not the other driver looks.
You know, Lee, you've had a chance to race in many of these enduros over the years, and the race at Lake Havasu has not always been a good one for you. Tell us a little bit about the accident that you had back about 10 years ago.
Well, I don't like seeing this picture to start with, because this crash represents 3 years of frustration and rehabilitation. But what actually happened here is I was running in the start about 7 seconds out of the start at about 140 miles an hour, and a boat lost control and veered in front of me, and I actually ran right over the top of the boat and cut it right in half, and of course you can see the boat blew into pieces.
Well, we're glad to see you're back in one piece, and great credit must go to the emergency medical crews that are always ready when the time comes. As we wind down to the final lap or two of the race with Don Johnson, you see the leader of Division III, the youngster out of Van Nuys, California, been running flawlessly all day. And there is your overall leader, the Siebold family boat out of St. Louis. Today it was son Mike, the 26-year-old, starting off the first hour. On the fuel change, they went to Father Bill. And Bill at the controls, finishing off a 4-hour effort. 2 days, the boat ran flawlessly like clockwork. Good pit work from the crew. And they will win by a 4-lap margin here at Lake Havasu. And there you see Father Bill getting out of his boat, getting congratulations from his crew. And there are the final standings here. The Siebold family taking the victory for the second time in a row. They have repeated the championship. And there are the final standings in the top 10. Finishing 7th overall and first in Division III is Don Johnson. As you can see, the press gathering around the trailer of Bill and Mike Siebold, a happy father-son combination. Victorious for the second year in a row. And here in the inspection area where the drivers are getting their boats looked over for the final time to make sure there are no discrepancies with the engines or the boats. Exciting two-day event that saw 75 of the world's best outboard race boat drivers battle for over $40,000 on this very unique but fast 2.5-mile boomerang course. The wind conditions played a critical part with many drivers going into the water. Attrition also took its toll. But Lee Sutter, the drivers that seemed to have the best ability were the ones who came home with the money and the checkered flag.
Well, Steve, I don't think there were a lot of surprises here. It's an extremely demanding event, and the veterans really prevailed.
So hats off to the Siebold family, winning back-to-back races. And Don Johnson, who took the Division III crown. And also in Mod VP, Chip Watkins, who won by over 2 laps. I want to thank you, Lee, for joining us today on the telecast, and we hope we can get you back again another time.
Enjoyed it, Steve. Thanks.
For Lee Sutter, I'm Steve Michael saying so long from Lake Havasu City, Arizona.